Russia continues to pound Ukrainian energy infrastructure as winter approaches. The situation on the front lines remains dire, and NATO Secretary General warns of a forever war if Europe does not step up to help. Even Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski told TVP World this week that Kyiv is bracing for another 3 years of war. Now, to take stock of these recent developments, we're joined by the founder of Ukraine Freedom Project, Stephen Moore. Stephen, good evening. Great to see you.
Hi.
Thanks for coming on.
Likewise. Yeah, for sure.
All right, Stephen. Last time I saw you on this program, I asked you the same question I'm going to ask you right now, but the situation slightly changed a little bit since we've talked last. So Ukraine is at a 2 billion euro shortfall in natural gas. Center Energo thermal plants have been knocked out of commission as winter is fast approaching. I'll pose the question again. Do you think this year is going to be different from the other years that we've seen in the winter? Do you think Ukraine is going to be able to adapt, as it always has done, to be able to keep people warm this winter?
Well, Don, we have electricity in my house today. And otherwise, I may not be able to be here with you. But, there are more blackouts. There's rolling blackouts that the energy company gives us warning about. So there's actually more of those this year than there used to be, because it used to be there wasn't that many, actually. And, the heroes of this war are the people that keep the electricity on, the people that keep the train tracks repaired when the Russians blow them up. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit rougher winter, but I think that the Ukrainian people are accustomed to rough winters. They're accustomed to this unkind treatment by the Russians. And, we actually did a poll that showed that 60% of Ukrainians agreed with the statement that the Ukrainian people can hold out longer than Russia's economy can continue to fuel this war. And 60% agree with that statement.
Yeah, let's hope that is the case. It looks like we're going to need a little bit of time for these Ukrainian-imposed sanctions on Russian oil to bite. But meanwhile, NATO Secretary General this week warns of a forever war if Europe doesn't do more. What should Europe do to make sure that this isn't the case? Should defense spending in Europe be prioritized for Ukraine first, for instance? Because if Ukraine fails, then Europe will be next.
Yeah, exactly. And Europe is this is a chronic disappointment. I think we've had this conversation many, many times. And, my least favorite country in Europe is Belgium. Belgium is buying enough liquid natural gas, 3 million euro worth of liquid natural gas from Russia every day, which is enough to buy 71 Shahed drones. And so they're paying for a lot of dead Ukrainian civilians. And of course, they've got somewhere near $200 billion in frozen Russian assets that all they've done is tax. So they've taken about $1 billion out of that frozen Russian assets, but they haven't sent much of it to Ukraine. And of course, they are the third most underfunded NATO country for the last since 2014. So, I don't know what they're doing there, but they're not helping Ukraine, and they have a lot of capacity to do so.
Well, hopefully that situation will change as well. Now, with the situation on the front line deteriorating and Ukrainian forces, it faces a huge manpower problems. Is it fathomable that Ukraine can fight for another 3 years, as Poland's foreign minister told us on TVP World this week?
Yeah, that is dependent on aid from Europe or aid from the United States. And, and listen, that can come in a lot of different forms. I was at this weekend at a hackathon, and, the level of technological advancement that's coming out of Ukraine is just breathtaking. American weapons, especially the drones, really don't work over here. They're very expensive, and they don't work as well as the homegrown Ukrainian drones, which are, $500 to $1,000. for a kamikaze drone. So, you can either have governments send money or investors can come in and invest in this Ukrainian defense tech that the Europeans are using right now. They called the Ukrainians and said, hey, we've got some Russian drones coming in. Do you think you could send us some experts and some equipment about how to keep them out of our airports and out of our central cities? And so there's Ukrainians right now that are helping them do that.
Do you think that's why we saw the defense minister go for the joint expeditionary forces? We have Ukraine becoming involved with that alliance, if you will. Do you think that they're more in need of Ukraine than Ukraine necessarily is of them in terms of what they agreed upon this week?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this, is that Ukraine has the most experienced and technologically advanced military in the world right now. So these people are hardened fighters. And one of my Ukrainian friends who's at the front actually went to Spain for training, for military training. And he said, yeah, they taught us how to fight in Afghanistan. And then they asked us a bunch of questions. So, this is what Americans and Europeans don't realize yet is we're in a global war. And, the only people acting on that information is our adversaries. So, Ukraine's expertise and hardware is going to be very important in the very near future.
Viktor Orban paid a visit to the White House on Friday. He secured a one-year exemption on U.S. sanctions on Russian oil. How do you think that's being looked at in Kyiv, especially in light of Orban blocking Ukraine's path to the European Union?
Yeah, that's hard to understand. Orban, we're all aware that he's the best pal of Putin in Europe, but a lot of people don't know that he sent 85 million euro to Iran to help them with their nuclear program back in the day. He's trained their scientists. In like January of 2024, just a few months after October 7th, everyone else in the world, every other country in the world is trying to isolate Iran's economy, and Orban opens up a trade agreement with Iran. So, he is not a good partner for anybody. He's got to deal with the Chinese for security, so he's playing all sides of the fence. He's just a squirrely guy. And, how he gets in the White House is beyond me.
Well, now the EU has tightened the visa rules for Russian citizens. Now they'll have to be approved for every single visit. Do you think that this is long overdue? I'm sure you do. But will it help prevent some of these sabotage attacks that we've been seeing committed by Russian operatives?
Yeah, that's hard to say because, I don't know if the Russians themselves are committing those. And look, I think I agree with anything that makes life harder on Russians. But they hire people in Poland, criminals, and lowlifes to do these things. So it's not just the Russians actually committing the acts, but it's people that live in the countries where the sabotage is happening. So that's a hard one to beat, man. That's like they're good at that.
Yes, indeed they are. Indeed they are. Well, what effects there will be, we'll yet to see. I'd like to thank you, Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Always a good time, my friend. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you. And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thanks for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.